Welcome back to another small bore and more. We've got some internal engine mods for you today.
So we've got the lightweight flywheel that we've bought from WeBike in Japan. If you haven't come across WeBike yet, check them out. They stock some amazing parts of the Honda Monkey. You'll be really impressed.
And we've also got the new cam chain tensioner arm from the SpeedShop in the USA. And again, if you haven't come across the SpeedShop, it's owned by a guy called Wayne Strickland who builds some amazing monkeys and groms. You should definitely check him out.
So if you want to have a close look at these components and see how we're going to fit them, keep on watching.
So first things first, let's have a closer look at the SpeedShop cam chain tensioner arm. It's a lovely design, alloy with an anodised finish, but the two most significant upgrades from a performance perspective is the fact that the smooth plastic roller that wears out over time is replaced with a toothed metallic one, and instead of just running on the shaft, this thing has proper ball bearings, so longevity is going to be hugely improved. Okay, so let's unbox the lightweight flywheel. So a flywheel is one of the heavier parts of an engine, and it's designed to make the engine keep wanting to rotate once it's started. The heavier they are, once spinning, they want to spin for longer, which helps keep the engine running smooth between gears, and of course initially when pulling away, letting the clutch out when the engine's trying to die and stop, the flywheel has a lot of rotating mass to counteract that and keep it turning. The downside is obviously that mass takes a lot of energy to spin up, and that energy, well, that could be going to the rear wheel. So a lightweight flywheel is much easier to spin up, zaps less of the engine's power to do so, and therefore revs the engine up faster. The downside, it's easier to stall, but once you get used to it, you compensate with an extra few RPM when pulling away. We'll get the weight of the OEM one once we've got it off the bike, but the new one's coming in just under 1.2 kilos, so still quite a bit of weight. It'll be interesting to see just how much lighter that actually is. Right, let's get them fitted. So the first thing to do is drop the oil, and because we have an underslung over racing exhaust, the design of that puts the header pipe right under the sump plug. So rather than let it run all over the titanium pipe, we'll just cover it over with foil. And once that's drained, I'll have to undo the 8mm bolts that hold the stator cover on. These are all the same design and length, so there's no need to keep them in particular order. Now, as the stator is the thing that generates electricity, obviously it's connected to the bike's main loom. So just trace the wire back, find the multi-plug and disconnect it. Once that's off, simply slide the cover off. You just have to overcome the power of the magnets. Once it's moved about 5 or 10 mil, it'll come off no problems. Then, as we need to grip the OEM flywheel, it makes life much easier if we clean it with some brake cleaner, just to remove any surface oil. We then use a flywheel holder, and this one's from Katako. It's a great bit of kit, but you could just use a rubber strap wrench, similar to what you'd use to take an oil filter off. Top tip, remove or rather slacken the Torx bolts that hold the flywheel to the back plate. You can do this on the bench, but it's much easier to do it on the bike, and they're in pretty tight with thread lock, so if you don't have something to hold it securely, you're just asking to round one of these heads. Then you're in a whole world of pain, so just loosen them off while it's on the bike. Now, we've got the 4th bearing crankshaft support installed on this bike, so if you don't, this will just be a normal nut, but take note of which way around the washer goes. With that off, there's really only one best way to get the flywheel off, and that's a flywheel puller. Again, Katako do them, but you can get them from lots of different manufacturers. As long as the thread's correct for your application, you'll be fine. However, to make it easier, we'll put a link in the description to this one so you know exactly what we've used. The way it works, it's screwed on, held in place with a spanner, and then you screw the centre towards the flywheel, which pulls the flywheel off its shaft. Now, it's quite an abrupt event and it sounds like you've just broken something, but it's just the interference fit being released. And once that's free, just lift it away from the bike, but be careful not to dislodge the woodruff key. Onto the bench to finish off removing the Torx screws that we loosened earlier. Then separate the flywheel from the back plate, not forgetting about the shim. So as before, the lightweight flywheel is 1,181 grams versus the OEM one that's 1,422 grams, which is a weight saving of 241 grams. Right, assembling it onto the back plate. You could just use new torque screws, and I'd recommend if the head's even the slightest bit chewed up, use new ones. We managed to get these out looking good, so we'll clean them up with a wire brush, get the old Loctite off, give them a bit of a degrease with brake cleaner, a dab of medium strength blue Loctite on each, and we'll fit them back in. Now, we couldn't find any torque settings for these, so we're just putting them in for now, and we'll make sure we nip them up later on when they're back on the bike. We don't need to go daft, because the Loctite will do its job, but they are going to need to be tight. Now, if anyone knows the torque spec, drop it in the comments below, help everyone out. Now, at this point, if it was just the flywheel we were changing, then it's back onto the bike. But of course, we're adding the SpeedShop tensioner arm, so we need to remove a couple of more components to gain access. With those out of the way, we get eyes on the OEM tensioner arm. You can see how much nicer the SpeedShop one is. Removal's pretty simple. It's held on with one 8mm bolt and a small retaining piece. The arm itself then just slides off. Side by side, you can see the difference is huge. The OEM has a rubber roller that can wear away, making it harder to keep tension versus the tooth version. And as you can see, it's just a bushing as opposed to the bearings of the SpeedShop version. Now, when we came to offer it up, it felt quite tight, and we reached out to Wayne and he responded really quickly, saying just tickle it with some wet and dry. Sometimes the anodizing can be a little bit thick, and they've done loads of experiments with slightly larger diameter holes and found going any bigger made it too slack on the lower end of the anodizing tolerance. So we wrapped some 1200 grit around a small socket and just spun the arm around a few times. As you can see, we removed a layer on the inside of the anodizing with hardly anything, but enough to stop it being tight. To refit the arm, you need to depress the cam chain tensioner. Now, this is more of a, I would call it a dampener than a tensioner, but it actually requires quite a bit of force to lower it down. It moves really slowly, almost to the point you think it's not moving at all, and then once you've gone so far, it'll fall right at the bottom. Offer it onto the shaft, keeping the adjuster depressed. This is where you could do with a third hand to kind of pull the chain down to make it easier to seat in the gear. Once that's on, just make sure it moves freely up and down and there shouldn't be any resistance. Then release the plunger on the tensioner and it should rise back up and take the slack. At this point, pop the retaining plate back on and the 8mm bolt, torquing it to 10 Newton meters. It's best practice to prime the tensioner by adding 4 millilitres of standard oil to the oil reservoir. This just means you don't have to wait for the oil pump to pump engine oil to the tensioner when you start it back up for the first time. With that done, we found it easier to add the ring gear to the flywheel and put them both on together at the same time. Offer it back up, aligning the woodruff key to the keyway and ensuring you replace the small gear and shaft that connect the starter to the ring gear. Again, another job for 3 hands. You then want to refit the washer and the nut. In our case, it's the 4th crankshaft bearing support. Then use the flywheel holder to support while you tighten back to 64 Newton meters. Clean the mating surface and add a new gasket. Refit the stator cover, refit the bolts. You want to be torquing them to 10 Newton meters. Reconnect the stator's electrical connection and refit the side panel. And before you start the bike, don't forget to refill the oil. So that's a lightweight flywheel fitted and the SpeedShop cam chain tensioner arm. It's such a shame you can't see the tensioner arm because it's beautifully finished. And the lighter flywheel, well, the bike should rev up a lot quicker with having less weight to spin.
If you want to see more mods for the Honda Monkey, subscribe to the channel and you'll see us out and about on the bike very soon.
So for now, that's all from Small Bore and More. Catch you on the next one.